Hi everyone, and welcome back to Latin America Correspondent, where I'm here again with Greg Gunter this month at the beginning of December. And Greg, another award for San Miguel de Allende.
Six-time team. We've been named the #1 small city in the world 6 different years by Condé Nast Traveler magazine. 6 years, team. I joke, one of my favorite cities in the world, Florence, in Tuscany, has not been named the #1 city in the world different times. Neither is Paris or anything else like that. We love the fact that it's been 6 years with Condé Nast Traveler, 5 years that we named #1 with Travel and Leisure magazine. So the accolades keep rolling in.
And how does that happen for San Miguel, this small little town which has maintained its size, 3 hours, 4 hours north of Mexico City? It's kind of close to Querétaro Airport, but it's not that
Difficult to reach.
Yeah.
Yeah, difficult
So
to
how does
reach.
that happen for San Miguel?
It's interesting. I kind of tell my clients that, we attract a more educated demographic here. It tends to be, it's not the beach crowd at all. The people that want the beach crowd and, sun and sand and, sex on the beach, drinks and those kind of things. They're going to Cabo and Puerto Vallarta and those kind of places. We are really a much more of an educated demographic here, kind of an older demographic as well, and more artistic oriented. They're interested in culture and history, and that's why they come. And this fits all of those to the T. So they're able to learn about 480 years of culture. They're able to see the art scene here. They're able to see opera, theater, learn a lot more about the history, get a good sense of, we're kind of like the Philadelphia of Mexico. So they can learn a lot of the sense of the history of Mexico and how the city, the country has evolved. So there's a lot of that kind of cultural aspect of San Miguel de Allende that attracts that kind of educated demographic that likes to vote at magazines. San Miguel de Allende is a little town of 150,000 people. So here's a good comparison. In Mexico City, they'll say buen dia. And here they say buenos dias. And, in Mexico City, they say porfa. Darme un cerveza porfa. And here you'll say por favor. And, it's kind of that provincial, the guys will wear shorts in Mexico City. And here everybody still wears long pants. And, it's kind of a small town atmosphere. We walk everywhere. But I kind of jokingly call it our little Manhattan because of the activity level and the culture that goes on. So, that's really what draws people and keeps them, like me, keeps them here, full time. I don't ever plan to leave. That's how much I love it.
And I would guess because it's quite a small town, it has that village feel, but also it means that you have these recurring faces within the population, the people that you know. So it's quite a sort of a personal place to live, I would guess.
It really is. My mama lived in a little town of 12,000 people, and it was a huge town, just spread out everywhere. Everybody had an acre for their backyard. And, here we're like a European village. So we're only 150,000 people, but it's very densely packed in like a European village. So you're walking everywhere. And I kind of joke with my clients, if you think it's going to be a 10-minute walk to get to the town square, which we call the Jardín, you better double that because you're going to run into 3 people that you know. We have about 25 to 30,000 expats that live here, English speaking. And when I say English, that's American and Canadian. Fewer Canadians, about 11% of our buying population are Canadian versus about 60% being American. But, nonetheless, a lot of English speakers that live here, and many of them, like me, live here full time. So you're bumping into them at the grocery store, on the walk to the Jardín, in the restaurant. And that's another wonderful thing about town is that you're always going to see people you know.
I also just wanted to pick up a little bit because San Miguel, of course, it has this sort of this small town feel, but it's also continually reinventing itself. I feel it doesn't just stop with the sort of challenges itself. It sets itself, and it constantly seems to be re-emerging in a number of different ways. Like the hotels, the tiny boutique, amazing hotels that keep emerging there, and also the restaurants, like the amount of Michelin stars and the sort of high-end restaurants.
Yeah, John, it's interesting. I've lived here full time for 16 years, but really been involved with the city for 19 years. And talk about how the city has evolved. 19 years ago, I bought my first lot to build my first home here, and we didn't even have a grocery store in town. So 19 years ago, we didn't even have, I thought I was going to be driving 30 minutes to the nearest city to be buying groceries. And now we have this gourmet market that makes Whole Foods look like a 7-Eleven. It's this called City Market. And I mean, you can buy live Maine lobster right next to the caviar, next to a stack of tortillas. It's amazing how the grocery scene, that the ability to live comfortably here, I guess is what I'm saying, it has evolved substantially.
And another good marker of that, I've got a good Mexican friend and client, and his grandfather actually developed one of the neighborhoods here called Atascadero. So he's been coming here. He's my age. I'm 67. He's been coming here his whole life also. He said, Greg, it's only been about the last 9 or 10 years that his Mexico City friends have been saying, hey, don't you have a place in San Miguel? Can I borrow it? We'd like to come and stay for the weekend. The Mexico City crowd only started coming back to San Miguel about a decade ago. And when they started coming, they started bringing the money with them. I mean, the Americans that come here are relatively well-to-do as well, but it's been interesting to see the wealthy Mexico City demographic come. And when they come, they bring the money, the investors. So those Mexico City investors come and open up the deep pocket restaurants here, the ones that are very nice and high end. They've got one in Mexico City and they open a second one here because we're widely known as the culinary capital of Mexico. A lot of that has evolved. Again, we were not the culinary capital. I mean, when I first moved here 16 years ago, we only had one rooftop restaurant. Now we have probably 30 or 35 rooftop restaurants, all very good. We have 650 restaurants in this little town of 150,000 people. So, that's changed a lot. The restaurant scene, we become the equestrian capital of Mexico. We are now a wine route, the second largest wine district in Mexico. So that kind of touches on how much we have evolved in just the 16 years since I've been here. It's been wonderful to see that. Yeah, I moved here right at the or right at the time that we were designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That was in 2008. I moved here in 2009. But the year before I moved here, I'd already bought a piece of land to start building on. But we got named the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, and that, of course, changed the city a lot as well. And that's when the press really started picking up on our little city. The gringos have been coming here since World War II, since right after World War II, but it was that UNESCO designation and then being named the number one city in the world multiple times, both by Condé Nast Traveler and Travel and Leisure, that started giving us a lot more international exposure in the press. And that has just grown exponentially, of course, over the years. I mean, like I said, we've been named number one city 6 times by Condé Nast Traveler and 5 times so far by Travel and Leisure as the number one city in the world. So more people hear about that and say, hey, what's the big hullabaloo about? I got to come down and check it out. And of course they go, well, we want to come back. And I just hosted a party for 20 people that flew down from the United States. We rented a big, luxury mansion here and had a kind of a week-long party for them. This was like 3 weeks ago. This is an example of how contagious the city is for people falling in love with it. Most of them had never been here before, and of that 20 or so people, half of them have already planned a return trip, and one of them has already bought a home. And that was 3 weeks ago.
Given its popularity, Greg, because obviously San Miguel has grown, but it hasn't grown at the same level that lots of other cities or towns have. And it sort of seems to have been strategic growth as well and human scale growth. How has it maintained its sort of sense of itself within these years in which it's become increasingly well known and popular?
I think part of it's topographic. Well, first of all, the city center is very dense. And so the growth that's extended out from there is a little bit constrained by topographics. We're kind of a teacup. We're kind of a lopsided teacup that goes up to a couple of hills. And of course, they've expanded beyond the edge of that teacup, onto those hills. But the growth is regulated very tightly by the city. And so, we don't have large developers come in like you do in the United States to do 100 home subdivision or things like that. The largest that we've had within the city, at least, there was a California developer that did a little 12 home community. 12 homes, that's nothing. That's a tiny little community, but that's the largest that we've seen from a kind of a consistent one developer kind of building a group. We'll have condos that get built on the periphery of town, and those are, not walking distance, so they are out on the edge of town. They're still walking distance, but they really appeal more to the City crowd, excuse me, that are looking for a weekend home here in San Miguel de Allende. So, they drive to San Miguel and they already have a car anyway, so for them to drive to dinner is no big deal. They don't mind that. Americans tend to not be invested in those condos that are on the periphery of town. And, they tend to look, in town, and it's a limited supply. So, there's a lot of demand for the homes that are within that walking distance radius of about 15 minutes. But, the city has also helped, restrict that growth I know when Walmart wanted to open here, for instance, the then mayor refused to let Walmart get a permit to open. So those kinds of constraints sort of keep us from becoming too cosmopolitan and too big and, you know, realizing too much, unconstrained growth that makes it too much of more of a metropolitan city. I don't think we'll ever be that. We get better infrastructure that helps people kind of get around town. Our Periferico, which is our ring road that goes around town, has been improved. The road that's going out north of town, which is where a lot of the new growth is happening on the road between San Miguel de Allende and going north toward Dolores Hidalgo. We just opened up a new, it's at least 4 lanes, in some cases 6 lane freeway that goes up that direction. And that's where a lot of the new development is occurring. So you get lots of gated communities that are being developed out there as well. That helps San Miguel as a city feel more intimate, I guess is the word I might use, because those are out of town, and that's a different demographic. Those tend to be the Mexico City crowd, or maybe people that are used to living on a farm, or have a lot of land in Martha's Vineyard or something like that, and they say, "Hey, I want 2 acres." They'll be out in that part of town, but for the most part, we tend to get more people that love that concept of walking everywhere.
It also seems to me that increasingly, I mean, this maybe goes back a few years now, but that there's sort of small, medium-sized strategic quality businesses that make the decision to site in San Miguel, and I'm sure it is an economic, a financial decision, but it also seems to me that there's a kind of a flagship aspect to being in San Miguel. That if you're there, that it's almost like a quality control thing. We're here, and therefore there's a perspective elsewhere that you must be a quality company and outfit because you are there. Would that be fair to say?
You know, we have like the city market that I talked about. I used to be a retail developer, and we would have never opened a city market in a little town like this. We have a Rosewood also, and Rosewood has started the groundwork for and we also have a Belmont. So we've had a Belmont and a Rosewood for several years here, but those two high-end brands have started the growth of a lot more of those really upscale hotels that I really think decide to put a loss leader in this city because we've been named the #1 city in the world so many times. So like we got to be in that market. We got to be in that market. That's in the press. Our high-end demographic knows about that. They want to look for our brand, and we're not there, so we need to open, a hotel. So we are getting, for instance, a Waldorf Astoria that's under construction now. Well, imagine how many towns of 150,000 people do you know that have a Waldorf Astoria? I mean, that's just unheard of, right? That's just the beginning. And it's true, of course, that that quality level that you see in the hotel chains also trickles down to the quality of the restaurants, even the quality of the smaller boutique hotels. They've had to up their game to kind of keep up and compete as well. So it's been a nice sort of trickle down effect from the quality of life perspective. I kind of tell my clients we are kind of going through that Aspenization process. But the wonderful thing about this city now and will remain for at least another 20 years, I think, in my lifetime at least, is that the firemen and the teachers and the artists can still afford to live in the same town. In Aspen, they got to drive 2 hours to get to work. And here, my maid lives in the same town. She doesn't have to drive 30 minutes away to the next cheaper city. They can still afford to live within San Miguel de Allende. So you've kind of have the full strata that live here. And that's what makes it a real city. It's not a hoity-toity Aspen where it's only the billionaires that live in a concentric 3 block radius. It's a very mixed crowd, and where we have millionaires living next to artists that earn $10,000 a year. And we have $3 million mansions right next to a little home next door that might be $300,000. We love that organic gentrification. That's what makes it feel like a real city and a natural city. If you go visit someplace like San Juan, Puerto Rico, that thing is whitewashed to within an inch of its life. It all feels like Disneyland. It just feels too fake. It just feels like it's too staged. And that's what we love about this city is it's not all segregated into different, rich and poor components. It's all a natural mixture and natural gentrification that's occurred in this town. And, that's what makes it so marvelous and charming.
Amazing. I think, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned art and artists. I'd love to be able to speak with you about that in more detail. Maybe we can have a special episode about that. And of course, next time we speak, it's going to be around Christmas time as well. So maybe we can focus in on Christmas in San Miguel and the slightly different Mexican traditions.
Greg, as ever, pleasure to talk to you here in live in San Miguel de Allende. Great to see you again, and always a really interesting insight into what's going on here.
And team, if you're watching, remember they're going to vote for us again next year. So vote again next year. #1 city in the world for #7. Okay. Thanks, team.